The wind whipped down the empty street, driving flakes sideways against the chain-link fence that framed Lincoln Elementary School, but Ms. Harper barely noticed the cold until she saw him. It was nearly 4:30, long after the last bus had gone, and the car line had emptied. But there he was, a small figure standing motionless just outside the gates, his shoulders hunched, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a sweatshirt far too thin for the season. She slowed her steps, her boots crunching on the salted walk, and took in the details. His shoes were scuffed sneakers with damp toes, his hair stuck up in the back as if he'd rushed out the door without a comb, and his cheeks were blotched red from windburn. She didn't recognize him from her third-grade class, but his face rang a bell from the cafeteria, one of the kids who kept to the far tables. She glanced around, half expecting a late parent to pull up, but the street was silent except for the hiss of tires on the distant avenue. "Hey there," she called, keeping her voice light so as not to scare him. He blinked up at her but didn't move, his lips pressed into a tight line. She crossed to the fence and leaned against the post. "You waiting for someone?" He shrugged, a jerky motion that made her notice the way he was shivering. The sky was already dimming, the gray clouds thickening with another burst of snow on the way, and something in her gut told her this boy was not waiting for anyone who was coming. She pushed the gate open and stepped out, the cold air biting through her coat as she approached. "I'm Miss Harper. I teach here," she said gently. "What's your name?" He looked past her, eyes fixed on the school doors now locked for the night. "Lucas," he muttered, barely audible. She crouched down to his height. "Lucas, where's your coat?" He dropped his gaze to the icy sidewalk. "Don't have one." She let the quiet hang for a moment, then shrugged off her own wool coat, the warmth escaping instantly. "Here," she said, draping it over his narrow shoulders before he could protest. The sleeves hung well past his hands, and he clutched the lapels instinctively. Up close, she saw that his lips were tinged with blue, and his breathing was shallow from the cold. "Let's get you warm," she said, nodding toward the side entrance where her classroom key would still work. "We'll wait inside for whoever's coming." His head jerked in a quick no. "Don't want to go in?" She studied his face. There was fear there and something else, a kind of weary watchfulness that didn't belong to a child his age. The street stayed empty, the snow swirling harder, and she realized she was the only adult left who could decide what happened next. She could call the office, though the secretary would be home by now, or the principal who lived across town, or she could stay right here in the deepening cold until she found out why a boy named Lucas was standing in the snow alone. "All right," she said finally, tucking the coat tighter around him. "We can talk here, but I'm not leaving you alone." He glanced up then, his eyes a startling pale gray that seemed even lighter in the fading light. "You don't have to," he said quietly. And something in the way he said it made her realize this wasn't about waiting for someone. It was about not going somewhere else. Snow gathered in the folds of Ms. Harper's coat as it hung on Lucas's thin frame, but he didn't seem to notice. His sneakers shifted slightly, scraping against the icy patch he stood on, and she realized he was keeping his weight moving just enough to stay warm without making it obvious. "Lucas," she tried again, her voice softer now. "If no one's coming for you, we can call someone to make sure you get home safe." His chin lifted just a fraction, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "Don't got a home? Not really." That sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the wind. She crouched again, lowering herself so their eyes were level, but he was already looking past her, scanning the street like he was expecting trouble. She decided to try a different approach. "Okay, then tell me where you were before you came here. Maybe we can figure something out together?" His mouth twisted, the kind of expression that belonged to someone much older than him, someone who'd learned that words could be dangerous. "I was with my mom," he said finally, though it sounded more like a test than a confession. "But she's not. She's not there now." Ms. Harper's teacher instincts screamed for more details, but she could feel his resistance like a wall. "Was she supposed to pick you up?" she asked. He shook his head quickly, almost too quickly. "Numbers, she don't even know I'm here." That told her more than he realized. This wasn't about a late parent. This was about a boy hiding in plain sight. The snow was starting to seep into her shoes now, and she could feel her toes numbing. She glanced at the darkening street. If they stayed out here much longer, frostbite would be the least of her worries for him. "Lucas," she said, a bit more firmly, "come inside with me. We'll sit in my classroom, and I'll make us some hot chocolate. We can figure out the rest after that." His hands tightened on the lapels of the coat, but he didn't move. "He might come looking," he whispered. "If he don't see me out here, he might go to our place instead. And if he goes there—" He stopped, his breath clouding in front of him, and the look on his face was enough for her to stop pushing. Whoever he was, Lucas was afraid enough to freeze in the snow rather than risk being found somewhere else. She exhaled slowly, weighing her next move. "Then I'll wait with you," she said finally, brushing a layer of snow from his shoulder. "But you're not standing here alone. Anymore. If he shows up, we'll deal with it together." For the first time, a flicker of something, relief, disbelief, crossed his face. "You don't even know me," he said. "Doesn't matter," she replied simply. "You're a kid standing out here in the snow. That's all I need to know right now." He studied her for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether she was telling the truth or just saying what teachers were supposed to say. The silence between them was broken by the distant sound of a car turning onto the street, its headlights cutting through the haze of snow. Lucas stiffened, his entire body tensing under her coat. Ms. Harper glanced at him, then at the approaching vehicle, and something in the way his breath quickened told her that he might have just arrived. The headlights cut a sharp path through the falling snow, catching on the icy patches of pavement until the glare felt like knives in Ms. Harper's eyes. Lucas stepped half behind her, his fingers curling into the fabric of her sleeve, as though the thin barrier of her body could shield him from whatever was coming. The car slowed as it approached, the sound of its tires crunching through slush growing louder in the stillness. Ms. Harper caught a glimpse of the driver, a man in a dark beanie, his jaw set hard, eyes scanning the sidewalk with the focus of a predator. "Is that him?" she whispered without turning her head. Lucas's grip tightened, the answer evident in the way he shrank back, almost disappearing into the folds of her coat. She shifted subtly, placing herself more directly between him and the street. The car rolled past them slowly, too slowly, as though the driver was memorizing every face, every detail. Then, without warning, it stopped just beyond where they stood. The brake lights bled red onto the snow, painting the street in an eerie glow. The man leaned toward the passenger window, craning his neck as if to confirm what he'd seen. Ms. Harper's pulse roared in her ears. Every instinct told her to act, walk away, run, shout, but she kept her voice even. "Lucas, we're going inside, now." She started guiding him toward the school doors, her steps deliberate, not rushed, because showing fear would only make them a target. Behind them, the sound of the car door opening cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. "Hey," a man's voice barked. It was deep, rough, and carried an authority that made Lucas flinch hard enough to nearly pull her off balance. She didn't turn around. "Keep walking," she murmured, her hand steady on his back. They reached the glass doors, and she yanked one open, ushering him inside before stepping in herself and locking it behind them. Through the glass, the man stood in the streetlight's halo, his gaze locked on them. He didn't shout again. Instead, he just stared for a long, unsettling moment before climbing back into the car. The vehicle idled for a few seconds. Exhaust, curling into the cold air, then slowly pulled away. Ms. Harper waited until the taillights vanished before speaking. "Was that your mom's friend?" she asked carefully. Lucas hesitated, then nodded once. "He's not my friend," he said, voice sharp in a way that sounded more like a wound than a correction. "And he's not hers either, not really. But he thinks we're his." That one sentence carried too many ugly possibilities for her liking. She took a breath, softening her tone. "You're safe here for now. Let's get you warm." She led him down the hall toward her classroom, flipping on the lights that cast a warm, golden glow over the rows of desks. The heater clicked to life, its low hum a welcome sound after the icy street. Lucas perched on the edge of a chair, looking both out of place and strangely familiar, like any other student she'd taught, except for the way his eyes kept flicking toward the window. Ms. Harper made hot chocolate from the stash in her cabinet, setting the steaming mug in front of him. He cupped it in his hands but didn't drink right away. "If he doesn't find me tonight," Lucas murmured, more to himself than to her, "he'll find me tomorrow. He always does." That quiet certainty sent a ripple of anger through her. No child should speak about being hunted as though it were an inevitable part of life. "Then maybe," she said slowly, meeting his gaze, "this time he won't." The flicker of hope that crossed his face was faint, but it was there, and it was enough to make her decide she wouldn't be sending him back into the snow without answers. By morning, the snowfall had slowed, but the cold clung to the town like a stubborn shadow. Ms. Harper sat at her desk long before the first bell, her laptop open to a blank email she'd been staring at for nearly 20 minutes. She had typed and deleted the opening line at least a dozen times. Who was she even writing to? The police? Social services? An old friend in City Hall? Every option carried risks, especially if Lucas's stepfather, or whatever he was, had any legal authority over him. The boy himself sat in the corner of the classroom, bundled in the coat she'd loaned him, his eyes fixed on the mug of cocoa she'd made him earlier. He looked more alert than he had last night, but still too quiet for an 8-year-old. "Lucas," she began gently, "do you know where your mom is right now?" His fingers tightened around the mug. "Home. Maybe. She doesn't go out much." The way he said it, flat, without the natural uncertainty of a child, told her everything she needed to know. "And the man we saw last night? What's his name?" He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the door as if the man might walk in. "Troy," he said finally, and the name seemed to taste bitter in his mouth. "He's been around for a while, since I was 5. Ms. Harper jotted the name in a small notepad she kept for parent contacts, though she knew this wasn't the kind she'd ever call for a conference. "Does he hurt you?" The question hung heavy in the air. Lucas's mouth opened, then closed. He took a sip of cocoa, buying time. "Not if I'm quiet," he said at last, and the words were so soft she almost missed them. Her grip on the pen tightened until her knuckles ached. She needed more, facts, proof, before she could do anything official, but every instinct screamed that she already had enough to know this child was in danger. She tried a different angle. "Does anyone else know about this? A neighbor? A teacher?" "No one asks," he said, and that cut deeper than anything else he'd told her. The first students began to arrive, their chatter and laughter filling the room with a normalcy that felt almost jarring after the hushed tension of the morning. Lucas slipped into the background easily, sitting at an empty desk near the window, as though he'd been a part of this class all along. If any of the kids noticed the new face, they didn't say much. Ms. Harper taught her lessons with one part of her mind, but the other was already building a plan. She would call Mrs. Delgado, the school counselor, on her lunch break. She would quietly ask Officer Renner, who sometimes volunteered in the school reading program, if he could swing by. She would not, under any circumstances, let Troy near Lucas again. At recess, Lucas stayed inside under the pretense of helping her stack books. As they worked, he asked, "Do you think my mom knows I was out last night?" Ms. Harper paused, a book halfway to the shelf. "Do you want her to know?" He shrugged, but the way his eyes dropped said more than his words. If she knew, maybe she'd stop him. That was the moment Ms. Harper realized he still believed his mother could be his safe place. She wasn't sure if that was true, but she wasn't going to be the one to take it from him. The lunch bell rang, and Lucas reluctantly joined the line of kids heading to the cafeteria. She watched him go, the weight of responsibility pressing down like the thick gray clouds outside. Before the day ended, she would make those calls. And if no one else moved fast enough, she would find a way to keep him safe herself. Because once you've seen a child standing alone in the snow, shivering under the weight of the world, you can't unsee it. You can only decide what you're going to do about it. The day moved with the slow, grinding pace of a heavy clock, each tick louder than it should have been. Ms. Harper had just sent her students to the library for their weekly reading period when she heard the front office intercom crackle to life. "Ms. Harper, could you step to the main entrance?" Mrs. Boyd's voice was careful, too even. The kind of tone she used when there was trouble, and she didn't want to alarm the children. Ms. Harper's stomach tightened instantly. She walked the long hallway with her, pulse drumming in her ears, already guessing who she might find. She was right. Troy stood just inside the glass doors, a bulky figure in a worn leather jacket, snow melting in patches on his shoulders. His jaw worked back and forth like he was grinding his teeth, and his eyes, narrow, restless, landed on her the second she appeared. "You got something of mine," he said, his voice low but edged with something sharp enough to cut through the quiet air. Ms. Harper didn't answer right away. She glanced toward Mrs. Boyd, who sat stiffly behind the front desk, one hand resting near the phone as though she might need to pick it up in a hurry. "If you mean Lucas," Ms. Harper said evenly, "he's a student here, and he's safe here." Troy's lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Safe? From who? You think I'm the bad guy?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the stale beer on his breath. "He's got a home, a roof over his head. You gonna tell me you can do better?" "I can tell you," she said, keeping her voice steady. "That school is not the place for this conversation. If you want to talk about Lucas, we can schedule a meeting with the counselor present." Troy's eyes flicked toward Mrs. Boyd again, assessing, maybe calculating. "I'm not asking," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I'm telling you, I want him back today." Before she could answer, a movement caught her eye. Lucas stood halfway down the hallway, frozen in place. His coat hung open, and his small hands gripped the strap of his backpack like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The second Troy saw him, the mask slipped. His mouth curled into a scowl, and his voice sharpened. "Come on, boy, let's go." Lucas didn't move. His eyes darted to Ms. Harper, wide and desperate. She took a step forward, placing herself subtly between them. "Lucas, go wait in the counselor's office." He hesitated, then turned and ran, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The sound of his retreat seemed to set something off in Troy. His voice rose, echoing down the hall. "You think you can keep him from me? You got no right. No papers, nothing. I'm all he's got. Ms. Harper's heart pounded, but she kept her voice calm. I have a responsibility to protect him while he's here. If you think that's a problem, you can take it up with the school board or the police. At the word police, Troy's gaze darkened. For a moment she thought he might push past her, but then he let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Fine. You just wait. You'll wish you never got in my way. He turned and yanked the door open, letting in a burst of icy wind before it slammed shut behind him. The silence that followed was almost as loud as his voice had been. Mrs. Boyd exhaled slowly, her hand finally moving away from the phone. I'm calling Officer Renner, she said. Ms. Harper nodded, though her own mind was already racing ahead. This wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. And now she knew for certain, Troy wasn't going to walk away quietly. By the time the last bell rang, Ms. Harper had already decided she couldn't just go home and pretend the day hadn't happened. Lucas had tried to act normal for the remainder of class, even answering questions and laughing once at a joke another student made, but she saw it in his eyes. The watchfulness, the fear that didn't go away. She knew that kind of fear. It lingered in the air like a smell you couldn't scrub out. At 4:30, she slipped her lesson plan folder into her bag and walked past the emptying parking lot toward her car, ignoring the soft hiss of snow beginning to fall again. The address was written on a sticky note, given to her by the school counselor after Ms. Harper had explained what happened with Troy. I'm not telling you to go there, the counselor had warned. But if you do, be careful. King Street was a row of tired brick apartment buildings, each one with a flickering hallway light and a front door that looked like it had been kicked in once or twice. Ms. Harper parked across the street, her breath visible in the cold, and climbed the steps to the 3rd floor. She knocked lightly, then again, harder when no one came. After a long pause, the door cracked open, held by a chain. A woman's face appeared in the gap, pale, with dark circles under her eyes and hair pulled into a loose bun. Yes? Her voice was cautious, thin. Are you Lucas's mother? Ms. Harper asked softly. The woman hesitated, then nodded. I'm his teacher, Ms. Harper. The chain slid free, and the door opened just enough for Ms. Harper to step inside. The apartment was dim, smelling faintly of stale cigarettes and something fried hours ago. A single space heater hummed in the corner, and a threadbare blanket was draped over the couch. Lucas's mother, Mara, she introduced herself, sat down in the one armchair and gestured toward the couch. I suppose you're here because of Troy, Mara said, her voice flat. Yes, Ms. Harper admitted. He came to the school today, demanding to take Lucas. Mara let out a bitter laugh, without humor. Demanding. That's all he knows how to do. He's not Lucas's father, if that's what you're wondering. Just someone I made the mistake of letting into my life. She rubbed at her temple like it hurt. He drinks, he gets angry, and when he's angry, he wants everyone else to feel it. Ms. Harper leaned forward. Mara, is Lucas safe here? Because I'm not sure Troy is going to stop after today. Mara looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together. Safe? Number not when Troy's in one of his moods, but I can't just leave. Where would we go? The helplessness in her voice was sharp, and it twisted something in Ms. Harper's chest. There are shelters, she said gently, and the school can help. I can help, but you have to let me. Mara's eyes glistened, but she shook her head. You don't understand. He's got friends. He knows people who can find me anywhere. Then we go somewhere he wouldn't think to look, Ms. Harper said, her voice steady now. At least for a few nights, long enough to get you both somewhere permanent. Mara hesitated, torn between fear and the smallest flicker of hope. Before she could answer, A sharp, heavy knock rattled the door. The sound made Mara flinch and Ms. Harper's pulse leap. Another knock, louder this time. A man's voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Mara, open up. We need to talk." Troy. Mara's breath caught, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Ms. Harper glanced toward the door, her heart pounding hard enough to feel in her fingertips. The sound of Troy's knuckles hitting the wood again was sharper this time, like he wanted the entire hallway to hear. "Mara." His voice was slurred, but full of that dangerous heat she recognized from his earlier outburst at school. "I know you're in there. Don't make me keep knocking." Mara's eyes darted to the back of the apartment, where a narrow kitchen window was cracked open just enough for a curtain to stir. "There's a back stairwell," she whispered urgently. "Through the laundry room, goes down to the alley." Ms. Harper stood, motioning for her to move. "Get Lucas," she said, keeping her voice low. "Now." Mara disappeared down the short hallway, and within seconds came back holding Lucas's coat in one hand and his small backpack in the other. He looked confused, but when he saw Ms. Harper's face, tight, determined, he didn't ask questions. The next knock was more like a pounding, followed by the ugly sound of a boot scuffing against the door. "Mara, don't make me break this thing in." Ms. Harper grabbed Lucas's hand and nodded toward the kitchen. The laundry room beyond was cramped, with a washer humming in one corner and a stack of detergent boxes leaning against the wall. She pushed past them, finding the heavy steel door at the back that led to the fire escape. It groaned when she pulled it open, the hinges complaining like they hadn't been used in years. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of snow and wet asphalt. Mara followed, glancing over her shoulder as if Troy's shadow might be stretching toward her. "Go," Ms. Harper urged. They stepped onto the grated stairs, their footsteps loud against the metal. Lucas clutched the railing, his small boots clanging on each step. Below them, the alley was empty, except for a green dumpster and a dusting of snow that muffled the city noise. Behind them, a crash split the air. Troy had kicked the door hard enough to splinter the frame. His angry voice spilled into the apartment, echoing toward them. "You think you can hide him from me?" Ms. Harper quickened her pace, pulling Lucas along. Mara was breathing hard now, her breath steaming in the cold. They reached the alley, and Ms. Harper didn't waste time looking back. She led them toward the street, her mind already forming the next step. The school was too far, and her apartment too obvious. They needed somewhere Troy wouldn't follow. That's when she remembered the small church on Maple and 12th, a blocky brick building with a pastor who once came to speak in her classroom about community kindness. It wasn't much, but it had a locked gate and a warm basement. They hurried down the sidewalk, snowflakes swirling in the glow of the street lamps. Lucas's hand was warm in hers, even through his glove. "Are we in trouble?" he asked quietly. Ms. Harper shook her head, though she wasn't sure. "We're getting safe. That's all that matters right now." Behind them, a voice barked their names, closer than it should have been. Ms. Harper didn't look back. She just tightened her grip on Lucas and quickened her stride. Snow stung Ms. Harper's cheeks as she pulled Lucas and Mara along the icy sidewalk, each step feeling louder than it should in the still night. The streetlights turned the falling flakes into tiny bursts of gold, but there was no beauty in it, only the pressing urgency of footsteps crunching behind them. "Almost there," she said, her breath quick and uneven. She could see the church now, its squat brick walls hunched against the cold, a dim light glowing from the basement window. The iron gate out front was shut, but a path had been shoveled to it earlier in the day, snow piled in neat banks on either side. "Go, go," she urged, her voice low but firm. Mara's hands shook as she reached the gate, fumbling with the latch. It stuck once, then twice, her gloves making it harder to get a grip. Ms. Harper's eyes darted over her shoulder. Troy's figure was there, dark and heavy against the light snow, his walk purposeful and too close. Come on, she whispered. The latch gave with a sharp click, and the gate swung inward. They hurried up the short concrete path to the heavy wooden door. Ms. Harper pounded on it, her knuckles aching with the force. Pastor Grant, it's me, Rebecca Harper, please open. She knocked again, louder this time, each sound swallowed by the thick wood. No movement inside, no shadow in the frosted glass panel. Troy's footsteps scraped on the sidewalk now. Mara's breath hitched audibly. We can't stay here if it's locked. Ms. Harper cut her off. There's a side entrance, around the corner. She tugged them back down the steps, hurrying along the brick wall until they reached a narrow alley that ran between the church and the rectory. At the far end, another door waited, steel this time, with peeling green paint. She tried it and nearly sagged with relief when the handle turned. The hinges moaned as it opened, warm air rolling out to meet them. Inside was a dim hallway, with beige walls and the faint smell of coffee and old books. This way, Ms. Harper said, ushering them inside and shutting the door behind them. She twisted the lock until it clicked. Footsteps scuffed outside on the snow. Troy's voice carried, lower now, more calculating. You think a door's going to keep me from what's mine? Mara flinched, her eyes wide. Ms. Harper didn't answer. Instead, she guided them down the hall to the basement steps, every creak of the old boards sounding like a shout in her ears. The basement was warmer, lit by two standing lamps that cast long shadows across folding chairs stacked against one wall. At the far corner, a couch sat beneath a quilted blanket, and next to it a shelf of board games. Lucas stared at it like it was a treasure chest. We can rest here, Ms. Harper said gently, glancing at Mara. He won't get in without a fight, and Pastor Grant will be here soon. Mara's lips trembled, but she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. Above them, the muffled sound of footsteps on the snow shifted to silence. It was somehow worse than hearing Troy's voice. Silence meant waiting, and waiting meant he wasn't finished. The warmth of the church basement settled around them, but it didn't sink in. Every creak from above, every faint thump against the old wooden beams kept their muscles tight and their breaths shallow. Lucas sat curled on the couch, knees tucked under the quilt, his small hands gripping the fabric so tightly his knuckles blanched. Mara paced near the far wall, glancing toward the stairwell every few seconds, as if expecting Troy to simply appear. Ms. Harper stood by the basement door, listening. For a long stretch there was nothing. No footsteps, no voice. She almost dared to think he'd given up. Then came the knock. It wasn't frantic or violent. It was slow, deliberate, a steady rhythm of 3 raps that seemed to echo deeper than the church walls. Lucas's eyes shot to hers, wide and frightened. He found us, Mara whispered, her voice breaking. He's right upstairs. Ms. Harper's jaw tightened. Stay here, she said, stepping towards the stairs. Her mind raced. Should she try to reason with him? Stall for time? Call the police again? She'd already dialed once in the alley, but the dispatcher said it could be 20 minutes before officers arrived in this part of town. As she reached the base of the steps, another sound rose through the silence. The faint creak of the church's main door opening. Someone had a key. She froze halfway up, straining to hear. Rebecca? The voice wasn't Troy's. It was deep, calm, familiar, Pastor Grant. Relief broke through her chest, and she hurried up the steps, motioning for Mara and Lucas to stay hidden. At the top, Pastor Grant stood in the dimly lit hallway, his coat dusted with snow. But behind him, framed in the open doorway, Troy leaned against the jamb, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Evening, Pastor," Troy drawled. "Looks like you've got some guests who forgot to say hello." Pastor Grant turned slightly, his brows drawn. "Sir, this is a place of peace. If you've got a quarrel, you take it elsewhere." Troy's smirk didn't falter. "The quarrel's mine to decide. That boy in there, he's mine, and she," he jerked his chin toward the basement, "has no right to keep him from me." Ms. Harper stepped into view. "You're scaring him, Troy. You're scaring both of them. Go home." His eyes narrowed, the lazy smirk slipping into something harder. "Not without Lucas." Pastor Grant stepped fully between them now, his broad frame blocking the door. "The police are on their way. You can wait outside, or you can leave before this gets worse." For a moment, the air felt like it might split in two, Troy's anger pushing against the steady wall of the pastor's calm. Then, with a short, humorless laugh, Troy backed into the snow, his boots crunching with each step. "This isn't over," he called, before turning toward the street. Ms. Harper's shoulders sagged as she closed the door, but deep down, she knew he was telling the truth. The church basement felt different in the hours after Troy's shadow vanished into the snow. It wasn't safety exactly, but it was the first moment Mara had allowed herself to sit without her muscles coiled tight. Lucas was asleep on the couch, the quilt pulled up to his chin, one small hand curled around the edge as if it might slip away. Ms. Harper sat nearby in an old armchair, her back straight but her eyes heavy, watching the boy breathe. Upstairs, Pastor Grant brewed coffee in the fellowship kitchen, the faint smell drifting down the stairwell. The police had come and gone, taking Mara's statement, assuring her a restraining order could be filed first thing in the morning. Still, she kept glancing at the basement door as if half expecting it to rattle. She was just starting to stand when her phone vibrated in her pocket. Unknown number. She considered ignoring it, then answered in a whisper so Lucas wouldn't wake. "Hello? Is this Mara Evans?" The voice was female, steady but carrying an edge of urgency. "This is Detective Harris with the Child Protection Unit. I just spoke with the officers who visited you tonight." Mara's hand tightened around the phone. "Yes, we're at the church." "I'm aware," Harris said. "I'm calling because I want you to know you have options. If you're willing, there's a safe housing program, a place Troy can't find you or Lucas, but I need your decision before morning." Mara's throat tightened. I don't know. We have nothing packed, nowhere else to—" Ms. Harper was already beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other motioning for the phone. "She'll do it," Harper said firmly into the receiver. "We'll get her there." There was a pause. Then Harris replied, "Good. I'll send a patrol to escort you at first light. Keep the doors locked until then." When the call ended, Mara sank back into the couch beside Lucas, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "We can leave?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Ms. Harper nodded. "Not just leave. Start over." She glanced toward the stairwell where Pastor Grant now stood, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. "We'll help you get there." For the first time in months, Mara felt the tight band around her chest ease. She looked at Lucas, then back at Ms. Harper and the pastor, and realized that even though her world had been stripped bare tonight, something else had taken root in its place, a fragile but undeniable hope. And outside, the snow kept falling, softening every sound, covering every scar the night had left behind. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on General Common Tales. If you'd been the one to open that church door, Would you have let her and her boy in? Tell us in the comments.